Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be here with you this lovely afternoon in June. The topic for today's class is called the Fifth Commandment, and that's reference to the 10 Commandments, and this one is number 5. The Fifth Commandment, we'll read it together, it's just source 1 on our sheet, and it says, "Honor your father and your mother, so that your days will be lengthened upon the land that Hashem your God gives you." In Hebrew, it's kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Honor your father and your mother, lema'an ya'arichun yomecha, in order that you are promised, you are blessed. God says, I will bless you with longevity, with a long life, upon the land, al hu adomo, asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach, that Hashem your God gives to you. Honor your father and your mother. The simple understanding here is that God says, I'll give you a blessing. There's actually 2 commandments in the Torah where it says, if you keep these commandments, you will be gifted with the gift of long life. You will live to a ripe old age. And the first one is this commandment right here of honoring your mother and your father. The second one, there's one more commandment that the Torah says, if you follow this commandment, I will give you the gift of long life. Anyone want to take a crack at that one? The one other commandment, the Torah promises long life for its fulfillment. Alrighty. Yes?
I think it's the one where you're not supposed to take an egg out of a nest if the mother is sitting on it.
This is the best crowd in the entire world. I'm certain of it. This is amazing. Yes, there's a mitzvah in the Torah that says that if you chance upon a nest with birds and you fancy to take the eggs, you want an omelet for your breakfast that morning, a little protein just to get the day going, you're not supposed to take the eggs while the mother bird is there. It says first send away the mother bird, so she shouldn't be present, she shouldn't see while you take the eggs. I once heard an incredible explanation of that, is that God created animals and humans in a way where we think that our children are the most adorable things in the world. You know? A baby, it's beautiful, it's so cute, it's amazing. Baylor right here has a son named Zevi, who is one of the cutest babies in the world, so it's a pleasure, Baylor. We don't thank you enough for all the wonderful things you do in making this run smoothly, so I just want to take that opportunity. Her son Zevi's adorable. My son is pretty cute too, and it's a good thing that he's pretty cute, because if he wasn't, and all those little cut papers on the floor that you come home to, you know, in the evening, and God created, He engineered the world specifically that way, that we find our young to be so adorable. It makes it easier to go through the sometimes difficult moments in child rearing. However, part of that cuteness is because they resemble us, they look like us. They're like miniature versions, they're born with like perfect little fingers and toes. By the way, Rabbi Levi Burnham just had a baby boy yesterday. He had a son, so mazel tov to him. They look like us. An egg in no way resembles, it's not a miniature version of the mother bird. It doesn't look like them. And yet the mother bird sits there day and night through the cold, through the heat, and she keeps that egg warm. She makes sure that she doesn't leave the nest. And in order for the mother bird to have these warm feelings, these feelings of love, God had to give a supernatural closeness that the mother feels to her egg, because the natural, wow, it looks like me, it's cute, I'm gonna make sure I'm there, that's not present with the bird. The egg doesn't look like the mother, and therefore God gave it an extra strong love, dedication to its egg. And that's why it wouldn't be fair for you to take that egg while the mother bird is present, while she's watching you first send it away. So these are the 2 mitzvahs, honoring your parents and sending away the mother bird, where the Torah promises long life. To share with you an idea that I heard from my father, he said, you know, you could take it as a simple blessing. God says, I will grant you a long life. Often we find the Torah says, if you follow the ways of the Torah, you will be given reward. Perhaps the reward for this mitzvah is a long life. My father once explained, it's actually a very natural idea. If you honor your parents, the greatest example we set for our children is not based on what we tell them, but it's based on what we do. Children who see their parents giving charity will naturally be more charitable people. If the parents say, you know, it's very important to give charity, but yet when different organizations are asking for appeals and they quickly put those envelopes in the garbage, you know, with the rest of the junk mail, the children might not learn that lesson as quickly from the parents. It's what they do. So if we see our parents honoring their parents, I remember my mother's mother, so her husband passed away when I was only about 8 years old. And my grandmother lived many more years thereafter. And there got to a point in time where she was no longer able to live on her own. And she moved in with us. And I remember watching the care that my mother gave to her. You know, there were some trying times, there were some difficult times. But my mother was always with a smile, always a dedicated daughter, and that's what I witnessed. So when a child witnesses their parents honoring their parents, well, they're going to do the same themselves. Yes?
I'm going to have to disagree with you on that, because this is my favorite topic.
Please, Sandy, go ahead.
Because I'm going through this right now.
Mhm.
I have a son that doesn't even say hello to me. And,
Wow.
And I was a very good role model for my kids as far as parents.
Yeah.
We did everything together,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
including traveling.
I can't imagine that any generalization applies to all circumstances. But I think that in general, though, in many cases, children often learn from what their parents do. Not always.
No, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. I'm just saying an example of who wasn't
Yeah.
the role model.
Sorry, that is probably a very difficult thing. I'm sorry. But anyway, that's the idea, that if you see your parents taking good care of their parents, then you will in turn, hopefully, one day care for them when they need you. And if they have good care, when they get into their old age, then there's a good chance that they will live a long life, because there will always be people looking out after them. So that's the idea. If you honor your parents, your children will see it. You'll be promised long life by virtue of the fact that hopefully your children will take care of you. Okay, it's important to note, and I'm going to come back to this point, but in this verse of honor your father and your mother, who does the Torah place first? Who's listed first? The father. The father is listed first. In this command to honor, the father is placed first. I'm going to come back to that in a few moments. There is another verse in Leviticus, and here it uses slightly different terminology, and the order of mother and father is reversed. And that's something which we're going to have to explore. Bless you.
Thank you.
We're going to explore that together. So let's take a look at source 2. And it says here, every man, your mother and father shall you revere. The Hebrew word that's used here is almost like fear, but I feel that revere is probably a better translation, because one is not supposed to be afraid of their parents. That's not a healthy relationship. You're supposed to revere them. And my Sabbaths shall you observe. I am Hashem your God. Revere your mother and your father. And then the verse continues, and observe my Sabbaths. And actually, that juxtaposition, the fact that the Torah tells us to fear, to honor, and be in awe of our parents, and then right away it says, observe my Sabbaths, we see from here that if a person's parent tells them to violate a commandment in the Torah, for example, this is a very common thing. And this is something which, unfortunately, it rips families apart. So you'll have two brothers, and they get into a disagreement. They get into a big fight, perhaps over an inheritance, perhaps over anything that could split families apart. And they get into a strong disagreement, and they tell their children, "I don't want you talking to those cousins that you were friends with. You'll be dishonoring me if you speak to them. If you speak to your uncle, that brother, if you speak to him, you'll be dishonoring me." So there's a commandment in the Torah to honor your parents. Are you obligated to listen to your parent, to your mother or your father, who says, "I don't want you talking to that person"? Do you have to listen? And the answer is, for you just to go and stop talking to somebody, to stop your relationship, to ignore their phone calls and not speak to them, that's not a correct behavior. Aren't we commanded to love our neighbor like ourselves? We have to treat them kindly, compassionately. And if our parent tells us to do otherwise, we would not be obligated to listen to our parent on that. And that we see from this, again, from the fact that in the same verse it says, honor your parent, observe my Sabbaths. It means if the parent were to tell the child to do something against the will of the Torah, you're not obligated to listen.
Here's a question.
Yes?
So I assume that there's a difference in the Hebrew word for honor and obey, because if it said obey, that would be one thing, but we're not really honoring them when we're doing something that we know is wrong. They may, for whatever reason, be telling us something that they may even know that it's wrong.
Right.
But at this point, that's just, we're not perfect.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you're saying it doesn't say obey, it says to honor.
Right.
And if you were to ask them in their heart of hearts, what's the right thing to do? In their intellect, they would probably agree that it's not the right thing for you to cut off communication with that side of the family, and hence you will be honoring them by not obliging their request. Okay, I like that. Sir, what's your name? That's a beautiful insight.
Nat.
Hi, Nat. It's a pleasure to have you
Thank
here.
you.
Okay, so 2 differences that we have in these verses. Number 1, the first source in Exodus says to honor, kabeh, to give kavod, to give honor. And in Leviticus it says to fear, to revere. And what are those 2 ideas? What does it mean to honor? And what does it mean to revere? And that's something which I would like to explore. And the question also is, why is the order of mother and father reversed? In the 10 Commandments, commandment number 5, when it speaks of honor, it says, honor your father and your mother. And when it speaks of reverence, it says, you shall, every man, his mother and his father shall he revere. It mentions mother first. So why that discrepancy in order? So let's take a look at source 3. Source 3 is from the Babylonian Talmud, and it is a tractate known as Kiddushin, and there it speaks of this mitzvah of honoring one's parents. Did I ever tell you guys the story how I was once teaching a class, and it was a class of women, and they're probably age ranging from 40 to 70 or so, 75. And my phone was on vibrate. It wasn't on ring, and it was on the lectern where I was speaking from, and the microphone was picking up the vibration, so it was very obvious that my phone was ringing, And I looked down, and it's my mother calling. And I have a policy, which is that whenever my mother calls, if I see, I won't put my phone in my pocket if I'm speaking to somebody else. I think that's not the most polite thing to do, because essentially what you're telling the person is, anybody who may be calling in my pocket is more important than you. So I don't pull my phone out of my pocket if I'm talking to somebody, but here it's my mother, and I see it's my mother, it says mommy, So what do? I'm in the middle of teaching a class, there's about 40 people in the room, what do? Policy is a policy, and I say, excuse me 1 second, it's my mother calling, and I take the phone call and I say, hello mommy, I'm in the middle of a class, is it okay if I call you back in a few minutes? Yeah, I love you, have a good day, I'll call you soon. And these women were just so, they love this. I wasn't trying to do this as like a gimmick to win people over, but it worked very well. So, source 3, Babylonian Talmud speaks of honoring our parents, and it says the rabbis taught in a brisa. What is, a brisa is a teaching of the Tanoim. The Tanoim are the early rabbis that lived right around the destruction of the Second Temple in around the year 70. And it says the rabbis taught in a brisa. What is reverence and what is honor? How do we define these 2 terms? Reverence is as follows. One may not stand in his or her place, referring to father or mother. If your father has a set place to stand, which is somewhat unusual nowadays for a person to have a set place to stand. But the next one, he may not sit in his or her place. That means that, let's say, at the dining room table, your father has a designated place at the head of the table. You may not sit in that place, or he has his recliner, it's specifically his recliner. You are not supposed to sit there in his place. It's considered disrespectful. And he may not contradict his or her words. So if your parent says something to you and you say, no mom, you're wrong. No, that is a lack of reverence. And he may not offer an opinion, which means that let's say your parent is in the middle of discussion with their friend and you chime in, well I think, you amongst your parent are not entitled to have your opinion. They are a generation above you. This is still, I grew up in the era, unfortunately, I think this era is coming to a close, where my mother's colleagues and her acquaintances and friends were Mr. and Mrs. It was Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. And I don't think we're there anymore. I think, unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where it's not that uncommon for people to call their own parents by their first name. I've seen, it's very widespread for people to call their in-laws, their mother-in-law, their father-in-law by their first name. And it's actually gaining traction, the notion of calling your parent by their first name, which is, to me, not something which is very good. They're your parents generation, they're Mr. and Mrs., their mom and their dad. Now with in-laws it gets a little tricky, because what do you call your in-laws, right? It's Mr. and Mrs. is a little bit too formal, you're part of the family. Mom and dad can work for some, but I could hear why that might be difficult for many, because if you call your own mom and dad, this is not your mom and dad. So I have it very easy, which is that my mother, as I told you, I call mommy. My father, I've always used the Hebrew term, which is Abba. So now with my in-laws, I just change it up a little bit. And my mother-in-law now, my wife calls her own mother in Hebrew, she calls her Ima. So this is easy, this is Ima, that's a no-brainer. And my father-in-law, I call him Dad, even though I think I'm the only one that she calls her him Abba. I have a hard time calling him that as my own father. I call him Dad, and we work that out nice and smooth. But the idea of reverence, of fear, really speaks of honor, but what it's telling you is there are certain things you mustn't do. It's all those things that you're not allowed to do out of respect and honor. You may not contradict them. You may not sit in their place. You may not stand in their place. You may not offer an opinion if they're in the middle of a discussion, as if you are an equal to them. You're not an equal. And included in that list elsewhere in the Talmud, it says that you're not supposed to call them by their first name. Now, honor. What does it mean to honor? We've already defined the term reverence. What does it mean to honor? And it says, honor, one must give them food and drink. So if your parent is visiting, you are meant to serve them. Figure out what kind of foods they like, and make sure you serve them that meal when they come to visit you. I have this thing where I have a hard time waiting on a line for food. I would rather eat bread and water than wait online. For some reason, it conjectures up images of the 1920s of people standing on a line. For some reason, I have a hard time with it. I was just at a wedding a week ago, and there was a long line. And my wife knows me, and she knows I'm not going to stand on that line. And she says, Chaim, this is not standing on line. This is spending time with me. Come stand here with me, and we're going to get our dinner together. So I spent time with her, and then we eventually got the meat that people were waiting for. But I once had a scenario where we were at a dinner together, and there was a meat carving station. And my father said, wow, that meat looks really good. Now, this is hereditary. My father also can't wait online for food. This is not something which he's able to do either. And I waited online to get him the cuts of meat that I wouldn't have waited online to get for myself, because that is this mitzvah. To honor your parent means to get them food. If there's something that they want, you get it for them. Number 2 is dress and cover them. If they say, where's my jacket? Sometimes my father would be on his way out of the house, he's late for a meeting, and he'll say, where's my jacket? Help him find his sports coat before he's leaving. Bring them in and take them out. And that would mean, in a modern day scenario, is they are coming to town. They're landing at the airport. You don't say, Mom and Dad, perhaps you want to take a taxi. No. You get in your car, and you tell your boss, I'm sorry, I need an hour off, I'll make it up, I'll do overtime. But you go in your car personally, and you drive to the airport, and you make sure you're on time. Because whenever you pick somebody up at the airport, if you're 5 minutes late, if they have to wait for you, you've lost a tremendous amount. So it's worth it to make sure you spend the extra 5 minutes in getting there. And when they are there, you're there to greet them. That's what it means to bring in your parents and take them out, and then bring them back to the airport when they're ready to leave town. So we've defined reverence and honor. Reverence are the things that you mustn't do, the do-nots, out of respect. And the idea of honor are the to-dos, to bring them food, to bring them clothing, to make sure they are warmly covered at night when they are visiting, especially in the cold, cold Detroit winters. And to make sure you bring them in, take them out, go to the airport when they are arriving in town. Now, that being said, the next source in the Talmud is going to analyze. I realize that we can't use generalizations to cover every single case. Not all families are the same. But in most families, right, there's a maternal figure and there's a paternal figure. There's a mother and there's a father. Which one of those two is generally the more revered? The one people who often hold in greater awe, you're a little more scared of. You would tread a bit more carefully when you speak to them. The mother or the father?
Wait till your father gets home.
Wait till your father gets home.
Sometimes wait till your mother gets home.
So, in my house, I'm actually the anomaly. It's my kids know if they want something, ask Dad. Don't ask their mother. My wife was recently in Israel for a little while, and there were all kinds of allowances going on. They were allowed to eat their dinner while they watched TV. I mean, this was all kinds of stuff that my wife would never hear of had she been home. But in most cases, it's the father figure who is the more revered. And the mother often has, not always, but often has a warmer relationship with the child. There's a little more love. It's if a child gets a cut, they fall down and they get a scrape, they know if they're going to go to their dad, they'll say, oh, it's nothing, tough it up, you'll be okay. The mother will be, oh no, it's bleeding, this is terrible. They'll get more sympathy often from their mother. That's often the way it goes. And here what the Torah wants, yes? Question?
Now, Rabbi, my mom was the tyrant. My dad was the gentle soul who said, you know, maybe we need to rethink this spanking. You know? And I was
Reconsider.
running my dad. I
Reconsider
would
the
say,
spanking.
Dad, she's after me, you know. My mom was very fiery, good mother, loving mother, but did not tolerate nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was the one who gave out the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her many times, I said, Mom, you didn't have to, I don't believe in hitting. I never hit my kids. But this is what they did when I was born. You know, in my family, they spanked you, they beat you. It was really abuse, but that's to be argued. And I let my mom know, I'm an only child, said, I love you, Mom, you did a wonderful job, but I do not believe in the spankings. But my dad never touched me, and he would try to get her to back off. And she said, well, you turned out okay, didn't you?
The proof is in the pudding, they say.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, my dad was my person I was
Right.
his little,
Yeah, daddy's little girl.
yeah. And
Got
but
it.
my mom, whew, you
Yeah,
don't
so-
get her started.
Yeah, so I think as well that, you know, perhaps decades ago, that method of parenting was employed more than it is now. I think that in modern day scenarios, it doesn't work as well. It's just not
Some
effective.
people
It's,
still eke it out, though.
yeah,
I've
I
had
don't.
heated debates
I don't.
about corporal punishment with children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I babysit my grandkids 4 and
I don't believe
6.
you're old enough to be
I
a
never
grandmother.
have been.
That's the biggest. That's a novel idea right now. Wow.
I've never hit them. If you tell them, I'm giving you time out, it hurts them. You know, no hitting, never. And
Right.
I tell their parents, try not to hit your kids.
Right.
They're just little tykes.
Right.
Don't hit them. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
don't hit them.
I agree. I
Yeah.
think that children naturally seek their parents' approval, and if you tell the child, I'm disappointed in what you've done, that is sufficient sometimes. Sufficient. If it's not, then sometime in their room by themselves, or we often take away a privilege. If it was really bad, we'll take away a privilege where you won't be able to go on this trip or whatever else it is. That would be our method of discipline. We pretty much never get our kids. Yeah. Okay, so I agree. It's not every case would it be the father figure who is the more revered and the mother who has a softer relationship. But I think that in probably most cases, that is the standard. And what the Torah really wants, it wants us to treat our parents equally. It wants us to honor our father as much as we honor our mother. It wants us to revere our mother just like we revere our father. And therefore, we need a little extra push in those areas which isn't as natural. And hence, when the Torah speaks about honor, who does it place first? Honor your father and your mother. It really wants them to be equal, but because a person would naturally have a very loving relationship and very quick to, Mom, whatever you want, I'll do for you, we want to make sure you do the same thing for your dad, and therefore to give you that little extra push, it places father first. Honor your father and your mother. And when it speaks of reverence, it feels that a person's mother we need to kind of place a little more emphasis. And that's why when it speaks of reverence, it mentions the mother first. Let's take a look at source 4. Again, I was taught in a brisa, which means the teaching of the early rabbis. Rebbe says, Rebbe is really an abbreviation for Rabbi Judah the Prince, the person who kind of put together the Mishnah. And it says, it is revealed and known to the one who spoke and the world came into being, that a son honors his mother more than his father because she wins him over with words. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed is He, put honoring father before honoring mother, to try to equal them out. And it is revealed and known before the one who spoke, and the world came into being, that a son is more reverent of his father than his mother, because it's often the father who teaches him Torah. And therefore, the father has a teacher role in many cases. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed is He, put revering mother before reverence of the father. Okay, let us move on. What we have on page 2 is a little diagram of the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments are set up where they are not read based on the line. We kind of take one side, one tablet, and we read down. And then we get to the next tablet and we again read down. So the first commandment is, in Hebrew, Anochi Hashem, I am the Lord thy God. Number 2, is lo yiyeh, you may not have any other gods besides for me. Number 3 is lo sisa, do not use my name in vain, God speaking. Number 4 is zachor et yom hashabbat, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. And number 5 is honor your father and your mother. That is the right side, side 1 of the tablets. Side 2 is lo tirtzach, do not murder. Lo tinaf, do not commit adultery. Lo tignov, do not kidnap. Lo sa'ana, do not bear false witness against your friend. And lo sachmo, do not covet your fellow's house, his wife, or anything that belongs to him. Okay? Now, there is a pattern between these two sides. And very often when we look to classify different kinds, we look to categorize different kinds of the mitzvot, of the commandments, there are different ways that we could set up the different categories. For example, there are the positive commandments, the do's, specific things that we are meant to do. For example, we are meant to eat matzah on Passover. That's a positive commandment. Then there are the do nots. We are not supposed to eat anything on Yom Kippur. So that's a positive and a negative. Okay? There's another way to classify, which is there are certain mitzvahs that we really comprehend, we kind of understand, we get them pretty well. Don't steal. That's very understandable to us. But there are other mitzvahs that are a little more difficult for us to understand. For example, do not mix milk and meat, right? Part of kosher we discussed last week is mixing milk and meat. Why not? I'm not really sure. That's not an easy one to explain. So there are the mitzvahs that we understand, and there are the mitzvahs that we got to just kind of trust God that He has a good reason, which is perhaps beyond our comprehension. Another way of classifying the mitzvahs are mitzvahs that are between man and fellow man. A good example of that again would be do not murder. That's between me and you. I am harming you if I try to kill you. And there are mitzvahs that are between me and God. They in no way affect you. If I decide I want to become an idol worshiper, and I'm going to have a big statue of Buddha in my living room, and I'm going to worship the statue of Buddha every night, does that harm you in any way? No. That's between me and God. All right? That's another way of creating two different categories of mitzvahs. And if you look at the different sides, the two different sides, the right side and the left side of the Ten Commandments, the right side seems to be all mitzvahs that are between man and God. Believe in me, right? Have faith in me. I'm the Lord thy God. Don't have any other gods. Don't use my name in vain. The Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day. If I choose not to remember the Sabbath day, if I don't make my kiddush on Friday night, have I hurt anybody else? No. But God says, I want you to do that. I want you to take a cup of wine on Friday night and recite the kiddush over it. I want you to light Shabbat candles on Friday night. Between man and God. I'm going to skip the fifth one, because that seems to be the anomaly. That is the one that just doesn't seem to fit. But if you look at the left side, it's between man and fellow man. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Right? If you commit adultery, you're ruining someone else's marriage. You're destroying their marriage. Lo tignov. Do not kidnap somebody else. It literally means don't steal, but it's learned out from context that it refers specifically to stealing another person, which is kidnapping, which is considered, according to Torah law, a capital offense. Do not bear false witness against somebody else. I am harming you with my false testimony. And do not covet. Don't try to be jealous of something that I have and then take it away from me. That's between man and fellow man. The one oddball, the one that doesn't seem to fit, is the idea of honoring your parents. It's on the side of the tablets that speaks between commandments that are between man and God. When really you would think it's a mitzvah between man and their fellow man, between a child and their parents. Why does this one not seem to fit in? And that's a question which I would like to explore together with you. Do we have anybody who wants to take a crack at that question? Why is this commandment on the side of the tablets that speaks between man and God? Yes, Lorraine it is, right?
Your parents are instead of God, or represent God, in terms of we are children of God, we are children of our parents.
That's excellent. Excellent. Just as we view ourselves as children of our parents, that's very obvious, that's blatant, right? It's visible. We are also meant to view ourselves as children of God, and perhaps use this as a metaphor, to just as we could easily relate to the concept that we're children of parents, use that to get a deeper understanding of what it means to be children of God. Very nice. So that's pretty much what I am going to explore and go through, with perhaps a bit more elaboration. So there's a statement in the Talmud, in source 5, And it says, the rabbis taught in the Brisa, there are three partners in the creation of a person. There are three people. You can't really call it people because God's not a person, but there are three players in creating a person. The Holy One, blessed is He. He gives us our soul. That's the part of the divine, the Father, and the Mother. Those are the three partners in the creation. When a person honors his father and his mother, the Holy One, blessed is He, says the following: I consider it as if I had lived among them and they had honored me. When a person honors their parents, God says, that is tantamount. I consider that. That is equal to as if they went and they honored me. And the question is, why? We honored our parents. Why is it that God says, wow, it's as if you've honored me? So let's take a look at one more source, and I think that this will become clear. Source 6, again, a quote from the Talmud. It says that the nations of the world heard the 10 Commandments as they were being given to the Jewish people. They heard, so what were these commandments? And they're told, these are the 10 Commandments. And they start listening. Commandment number 1. Let's pick it up in source 6. When the Holy One, blessed is He, said the first 2 of the 10 Commandments, I am Hashem your God, and you shall not have any other gods. The nations of the world said, He's saying this for the sake of His own honor. Look at this narcissistic God. He cares about Himself. I am the Lord. Don't believe in anyone else besides for me. They had a negative impression of God. But when He said, honor your father and your mother, they heard commandment number 5. They retracted their position and acknowledged the first 2 statements. And I believe what's going on here is, it's all about appreciation. A parent does a tremendous amount for a child. It's hard to imagine that until you experience it. What it is that a parent does for a child. We give them everything. We give them everything. We give them, from the moment they're born, they're completely incapable of doing anything for themselves. And we clothes and food, and we wake up with them, and their education, everything, and all that giving. We give them so much. And the underlying idea of honoring one's parents is to acknowledge the good that was done for you and to show appreciation for it. That's one of the most basic, fundamental Jewish ideas. What is one of the pillars of Judaism? It's to acknowledge good that was done for you, to be thankful. The word Yehudi, which is the way we call Jews. Jew comes from that word. Right? It's like that in English, it's like that in German. Jude or Jew comes from the word Yehud, which means to say thank you. It means to be a thankful people, to appreciate when someone else does something good for us. No one has done more good for you than your parent. They're responsible for your existence and for your upbringing, for everything that you have. That's the underlying theme behind honoring your parents, is showing appreciation. There's another partner in our existence, and that one is not as visible as Lorraine said. We may be children of God, but we don't necessarily see that as clearly. And we're meant to use our parents as an example, as the prototype of saying, wow, they've done so much for me, and here I see that. I'm going to show appreciation. I'm going to also acknowledge the fact that God did a tremendous amount for me. So therefore, when you honor your parents, God says, good, you're showing appreciation. You got one step closer to say, God, thank you too. You've also given me so much. And that's the understanding behind Source 5. When a person honors their parents, they have now begun, they have embarked upon their path of appreciation. It'll be that much easier for them to show appreciation to God for all that He has done for them. And that's the understanding of the nations of the world. They thought that God was just in it for His own honor. But perhaps He's not in it for Himself. Does He really need anything from us? God has everything. He doesn't need anything from us. He wants us to be good people, better people, more appreciative people. And that is the clear understanding of the 5th commandment. And when the nations of the world heard that we're meant to honor our parents, they said, wow, the first 2 as well. It's not about Him. It's not that God is this narcissistic individual who wants us to give honor. He wants us to be appreciative people. And that's the theme of many of the commandments that we have. Any questions so far? Okay. There's a fascinating and rather famous episode, a story that is told in the Talmud. And I will summarize the story for you, then we'll read it together inside the actual text. The story goes that the sages of Israel were in a panic. There was a crisis. And the crisis was that the high priest, who had special clothing, the Torah in great detail goes through all the clothing that the high priest wore. And one of the things that he wore was a square plate that went across his chest. And on that plate were 12 stones. Each stone, a precious stone, a beautiful stone. And on each of the 12 stones were engraved the names of the 12 tribes. As a matter of fact, there's an amazing museum in New York City called the Living Torah Museum. And there they have incredible artifacts, Judaica. They have the world's most expensive menorah. It's the oldest menorah. It dates back a really long time, and it's worth about $1 million. And the owner of the museum actually lets you hold. That's the only museum. He lets you hold. He says, "Here, hold this." I know I can't hold that. What if I drop it? He lets you hold these relics of the past that are worth so much, and you feel like you're connecting to history. This museum was voted by one of the real snobby New York museum review papers as one of the greatest museums of New York City. So it's going up against, the National Museum of History. It's going up against the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and this museum ranked one of the highest. And in this museum, he has for sale, you could buy the 12 stones. They're not of very high gem quality, but they are the stones, the 12 stones that were worn on this plate, on this plate that the high priest wore across his chest. And this plate was affixed to 2 shoulder straps that he had. And on those shoulder straps were, again, that was called the ephod. That was the name of the shoulder straps, the ephod. And on that ephod were, again, 2 stones. On each of those stones were engraved, on one of them, 6 names, 6 tribes, and on the other stone, the other 6 tribes. One of these 2 shoulder strap stones went missing. It's gone. It's happened sometimes where women will look down at their finger and they'll notice that either their ring is gone or that the stone fell out of their ring, and this is a crisis. And here as well, the Kohen needs to have all of his clothing in order to be able to serve in his position as high priest. They need to get a hold of a stone. And they hear about a certain person. He wasn't Jewish. His name was Dama. And they heard that he had the perfect stone that they were looking for. And they travel out, they send a delegation of rabbis to Dama, and they make a very, very generous offer for the stone. And he is thrilled, because that's the best offer he had. And he says, "You know what? I'm happy to sell it to you. Let me go get the key to the locked box where I keep the stone." And he notices that the key is underneath a pillow where his father is sleeping. He doesn't want to wake his father. And the sages say, this is a crisis. The high priest can't do the service until we have that stone. If you can't give us that stone, we heard about someone else who has the stone, we're going to have to go elsewhere. We can't wait. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to wake my father up." And they said, "We're very respectful of that. We appreciate that. But we're going to have to move on." And they moved on and they purchased the stone from elsewhere. He forfeited an incredible profit so as not to wake his father while he was sleeping. And the story continues. The story continues in the Talmud that God rewarded Dama. And there's something called the red heifer. The red heifer is something which is used in a Jewish ritual where if we come in contact with something that can make us ritually impure, for example, if we ever come in contact with a dead body that makes us ritually impure, on the one hand it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to be engaged in a funeral, to pay our last respects and to bury a person, to bring them to their final resting place, but it also makes us ritually impure. Just one idea on that is that if you look at all the things that make you ritually impure, they almost always speak of potential that no longer exists. And the greatest loss of potential is the loss of life. While the person was alive, they had incredible potential, and now this is a lifeless body, it's devoid of its potential, it makes you ritually impure. So when you're ritually impure, you're not allowed to go into the area, into the confines of the temple. In order to become purified, you need the ashes of the red heifer. They would bring it as a sacrifice, and there would be certain ashes. This is one of the most difficult to understand sections of the Torah. King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said that section that deals with the purification of the red heifer is beyond his level of wisdom. But it's an important thing to have this red heifer. It needs to be totally red. And Doma one morning wakes up and his cow was giving birth to a calf, and wow, the calf is perfectly red. And the rabbis hear about this, they send the same delegation, and they say to Doma, we hear you have a red heifer, it's great to be here again, to see and talk to you. And Doma says, listen, let's cut the small talk, right? I know that no matter how much money I ask, you will pay it. This is quick, you need this. I'm going to be a fair guy. Whatever profit I lost by not selling you that gem, that's what I'm going to ask for, and he was able to regain any losses that he incurred. But this is used as an example, as a prototype of how far a person is obligated and expected to go so as not to disrespect their parent. If you wake up the parent because you want to make a little bit of money, a lot of money, it would be considered something disrespectful and dumb. It's interesting, it uses the example of a non-Jew to learn this lesson from, that it is so important to honor our parents. Let's read the story together from the text. Rabbi Yehuda said, in the name of Shmuel, they asked Rabbi Eliezer, how far does the mitzvah of honoring one's parents extend? He answered them, go and see what an idolater, he wasn't Jewish, he worshipped idols, and yet we still learn valuable lessons from him, did for his father in Ashkelon. Non-Jews lived in Israel then as well. Ashkelon is a city which is on the coast of Israel, under the Mediterranean. It's actually under a lot of rocket fire now from Gaza. It's one of those cities that always has the air raid sirens going off. And this man, his name was Doma ben Asina. And the sages wanted to buy stones for the ephod from him at a profit of 600,000 gold dinars. That was the amount of profit he would have made. I don't know what that translates to in dollars, but I know it was a lot of money. But the key to the chest, where the stone was locked, was lying under his father's pillow, and he did not want to disturb his father. The next year, the Holy One, blessed as he, gave Doma his reward, and a red heifer was born into his herd. The sages of Israel went to him to purchase it. Doma said to them, I know that if I would ask from you all the money in the world, you would give it to me. However, I ask from you only the money that I lost as a result of honoring my father. Okay. Let's move on. And this is a very valuable idea, the following. It's not always what we do, but it's often how we do it that really determines the value of our actions. And the Talmud makes the following statement in source 8. It says that Avimi, the son of Rabbi Abba, who taught the following. One can feed his father pisyon birds. Now that word pisyon is not English. It's Aramaic. I just transliterated it. But it speaks of a very expensive bird, similar to quail. And that was considered the great delicacy in the times of the Talmud. As a matter of fact, if you went to the supermarket nowadays and you wanted to buy meat or you wanted to buy chicken, which one would cost you more? The meat. The meat would be considerably more pricey. In the olden days, it was the opposite. If you wanted to buy meat, I think probably people had higher cholesterol back then because the meat was cheaper and the chicken, the fowl, the poultry, was much more expensive. And just my theory on that, of why that was, is that if you were to have an animal, and now you're butchering up the animal, you don't have refrigeration. The meat is going to last for how long? You have a huge amount of meat, and you've got to get rid of it quickly, because it will spoil if you don't. And they did salt some of it, and they used the salting as a preserving method, but for the most part, you have to get rid of most of that meat. So the way business works is if you have a large quantity of something and people know that you're interested, you're eager to get rid of it, the price won't be that high. And that was meat. Chicken, on the other hand, chicken's very small. You're not looking to get rid of it that quick, and therefore I believe that's perhaps the reason why if you look in several places in the Talmud, you'll see that chicken was considered a greater delicacy than meat. So it says here that a person could feed their father pisyon birds, which is that was the top of the line as far as poultry went. But this act could drive him from this world, which means that he will get punished for it. And on the other hand, one can make his father grind with a heavy millstone, and this act can bring him to life in the world to come. Now, how do you understand that? The way Rashi, the classic commentator on both Bible and Talmud, the way he explains it, is that let's say you're wealthy, and you provide your father with a delicious dinner, and you make it very clear to him that this is a burden on you, that you're not happy to be doing this. This is very hard for you to do. Your dad says, son, where's this from? And you say, oh, you don't even have the courtesy to answer politely. Well then, it's not what you're doing, it's how you do it. And the fact that you do it showing your disdain, showing the fact that you're not content to be doing it, you won't be rewarded for it. On the other hand, let's say you have a family, and sometimes, especially in the old days, people lived with a more extended family. It wasn't the nuclear family that we have. And you would have parents, children, and grandparents all living in the same home. And you could say to your parent, listen, Dad, we are struggling financially. Do you think you could help out? We could use a little help in the mill. And your dad would say, sure, I'm happy to be involved. So you're asking your father to work in the mill, but you're making them feel valuable. You're showing how much you appreciate what they're doing for you. Well, that's honoring them. Another scenario could be, this is also quoted by Rashi, is that in the olden days, the kings weren't always fair with people. And if anyone was unemployed, they would conscript them into the king's service, treat them harshly, and not pay them well. So if you are employed at a mill, and you are then going to be safe from the king's draft, your father, though, was unemployed, well, if you give him your job and say, Dad, come work at the mill, right? So you are saving him from the king's draft, and you're putting yourself in that position. That would be another example of how you could be asking your fathers to do very difficult, hard physical labor, and yet be rewarded for doing so. So that's an important idea, and this is so critical that when you do something nice for your parents or for anyone, if you don't do it with a smile, you might as well not have done it, right? It's all in how we do it. It's not so much what we do. Just some more examples from the Talmud of great Talmudic sages who went to great lengths to honor their parents. Source 9. Great man by the name of Rabbi Tarfon. It says that he had an elderly mother, that whenever she wanted to climb into the bed, he would kind of bend down and help hoist her up. And she would climb on him into the bed. Whenever she descended from the bed, she would descend on him to reach the floor. And keep in mind, this was a great sage. This was somebody who had thousands of students who would stand up the moment he walked into the room. But his mother was his mother. And if it meant getting on the floor to help her, she might have been a short woman, I don't know, or her bed might have been really high, it doesn't say. But he would get down there, get dirty. There are certain things that are worth lowering yourself for, and a parent is certainly one of them. So, Rabbi Tarfon wanted others to learn from his example, and it says Rabbi Tarfon came to the study hall, and he told his colleagues, he told his friends about his performance of the mitzvah. He wasn't doing this to brag, but sometimes when you do something good, it's worthwhile to share that because others could follow suit. His colleagues told him, you haven't even reached even half of the honor that one could give his parents. Has your mother ever thrown a bag full of money into the sea in your presence and you did not shame her? It means that if your parent were to be making a very bad mistake, and it's a foolish mistake perhaps, and you're allowed to point it out to them and say, perhaps this is not the wisest thing to do, but to yell at them, which a person might do in the heat of the moment if you see your parent about to really, throw away their money, not to shame them. That the Talmud uses that example as perhaps the pinnacle, as the height of even at that moment when they're squandering their fortune, not to embarrass them. So, before I moved to Michigan, which I'm so thankful, I feel so blessed to be here, which is the truth, I lived in New York, and I served as a rabbinic intern with my father at his synagogue for 2 years. And while I was there, I'm not going to share with you the name of the person because I don't want to, this is, I think, a private matter. A woman came to me and she said she has a dilemma. She said that her parent is verbally abusive, always has been, and whenever he calls, it's always to put her down, it's always to say something that will ruin her day. And how is she meant to interact in this situation? She knows there's a mitzvah to honor her parent. On the other hand, this is a very hurtful thing, and it always has been. How should she act in this case? And I believe the following story in the Talmud, and actually the Rambam Maimonides deduces a law from this story. And the story goes as follows. It speaks of a sage named Rav Asi. This is in source 10. It says that Rav Asi had a mother, and the mother made one request of him. She said she was no longer married, perhaps she was widowed. She says, Asi, I would like you to get some jewelry for me. And he says, okay, I'm going to make sure we get some jewelry for you. Then she says, Asi, I would like you to find me a husband. He says, okay, I'm going to go around town. I'll see if I can find a suitable match for you. And then she says, Asi, I want you to get me a husband who is as handsome as you. And it was with that question that he realized that she was no longer stable mentally, because it was a strange. Perhaps it was the demeanor in which she said it, the manner that she requested that. And he said, I am now going to have, this is going to become too great a burden to bear. And it says that he felt like he had to leave. He felt he had to leave the area because he wouldn't be able to respect her properly anymore. He didn't want to not be able to fulfill her requests. When it got too burdensome, he felt that he was allowed to take that yoke of responsibility off of himself. And when you apply this to this woman's question, what is she meant to do when her parent calls her, who's going to hurt her, always has been hurting her? I think that the answer is that you're not obligated to take that level of hurt. You don't have to answer the phone. That was my response. If he's going to abuse you and you say he has been, you're not obligated to be somebody else's punching bag. That's not the full extent of the obligation to honor your parents doesn't extend that far that you have to be willing to suffer abuse. Hence, you're not obligated to answer the phone. Let's move on. We just have about 1 or 2 minutes left, and I want to end on a happy note. So we're going to end with something nice and beautiful. And the Talmud says, okay, we've given some nice examples how one can honor and respect their parents while the parent is alive. You could bring them food, you could pick them up from the airport. But the way of the world is that we hope that children will outlive their parents. And the question is, well then, how do we manage to honor our parents, bless you, after they are deceased? Is there any way that we could honor our parents after the parent has already left this world? We can't bring them that cup of water. Perhaps we wish we can, but we can't. Is there anything we can do now that will still bring honor to our parents?
Charity.
Yes. And that's going to be the answer, which is that we exist because of our parents. Very often the ideals that we live by were instilled in us by our parents. So if I give charity in memory of my parent, what that really means is that I'm only here, I only exist because of my parents. This charitable act is a result of my parents, because I only exist because of them. When I do something great, something good, something charitable, they get that merit in the next world again. And it's logical, it makes sense, because it is a result of them. Perhaps it's what they taught me, or perhaps it's just simply I exist because of them. And they are able to gain merit. And that is our way of honoring our parents after they've deceased. We refer to them in a respectful way. We say, my father of blessed memory, or my father, my mother. A person could say, if a person's mother is deceased, may I be an atonement for her, which means that the things that I will do will bring atonement to her, because now she gets merits in the next world, even though she's no longer living in this world. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.